Wel, prynhawn da unwaith eto I chi gyd. This week, after so many difficult weeks and months, we have seen a glimmer of hope. The first COVID-19 vaccine is ready for use in the UK, and we hope that the next one will follow soon. Here in Wales, our plans have been thoroughly tested. We expect to receive the first supplies in the next couple of days. We have trained staff ready to give the vaccine, and I'm pleased to be able to say this afternoon that we are planning to begin vaccinating people from Tuesday of next week. Now, we hope, of course, that this marks a turning point in the pandemic and that it will put us onto what is going to be a long path back to normality. Because while the vaccine offers hope for the future, the position today in Wales remains very serious. Almost 2/3 of our local authorities have a 7-day incidence rate of 150 cases per 100,000 people or higher. In 2 areas, the rate has now exceeded 400 cases per 100,000, and the rates are rising in all but 2 local authorities in Wales. A week ago, the all Wales figure was 188 cases per 100,000 people. Yesterday, it was nearly 50 percentage points higher than that. The percentage of tests which are positive, the test positivity rates, are also increasing. This slide shows that following a downturn after the firebreak period, we are now experiencing an unmistakable rise in coronavirus once again. And that pattern is now true of all ages here in Wales, both those aged under 25, but also this week, now in the over 60 age group. The result is that every day we are seeing more and more people admitted to hospital with coronavirus symptoms. In the last week, we have seen a record number of coronavirus-related patients in our hospitals, and these numbers are increasing. And many of these patients will be in hospital for 3 weeks or longer. The epidemic is putting our health service under a significant and sustained pressure. Yesterday, the Welsh Ambulance Service declared a critical incident, the first real visible sign of the impact of coronavirus on day-to-day care. The problem was not so much ambulances or crews being unavailable, but that hospitals in some parts of Wales are now so full of patients with coronavirus that it simply wasn't possible for our ambulance service to attend to other people's emergencies in the way that we would want and expect. Now, fortunately, that position has improved today, but yesterday, the impact of coronavirus in our health service was absolutely real and making a difference in the care we were able to offer to people suffering from strokes or heart attacks or having broken limbs. And of course, as we know, we continue to see high numbers of deaths each day and each week. My thoughts continue to be, as ever, with the families and friends of all of those who have lost a loved one to this awful virus. And for all, to protect your health, to make sure the NHS can look after all our health needs to slow the spread of this virus and to save lives. It is for these reasons that we must act now to strengthen our package of national measures as we face the winter period ahead. As you know, from 6 p.m. tonight, the coronavirus regulations will be amended. They will require the closure of all indoor entertainment and other visitor attractions. All pubs, bars, cafes and restaurants will have to close their doors at 6 p.m. every day, and no alcohol can be sold. I want to be clear that if Wales were in another part of the United Kingdom, our coronavirus situation would mean that we would be subject to the English Tier 3 regime or Level 3 restrictions in Scotland. And difficult as these new restrictions are, they simply bring Wales into line with those areas of Scotland that face similar challenges, and indeed they are less restrictive than those faced by similar areas in England. And to help with all of that, we are providing a £340 million package of support to help businesses through this difficult period. And that includes a £180 million package of funding expressly for the hospitality and tourism sectors. Across the combined package, an average-sized, single-site hospitality business employing 6 people will be able to claim up to £14,000 to help with their fixed costs. And that is in addition to the wage support schemes available from the UK government. A calculator will be available next week on the Business Wales website to allow businesses to work out how much help they will be able to obtain from the most generous package of support anywhere in the United Kingdom. Of course, these are incredibly difficult decisions. There have been no easy choices this year, especially when we are making decisions which affect people's businesses and livelihoods. But throughout the pandemic, this government has taken the decisions that are necessary to protect your health and the health and well-being of your family. It is my responsibility to do whatever is needed to save the lives of people here in Wales. And I want you to know that the government that I lead is a government that will never shirk our duty to discharge the responsibilities that lie in our hands, however difficult and however challenging those decisions may be. Now, before I take questions, I want to update you about 2 important developments in our response to coronavirus. We're starting the process of offering all health and social care staff, including people working in hospices, regular testing. These using the new rapid lateral flow devices now available to us in Wales. Everyone will be offered one of those rapid tests twice a week, starting with people working in higher risk patient-facing areas. Testing will be available to everyone in health and social care by January of next year. And we have agreed an important addition to the Christmas arrangements to make sure that people living alone, single parents and those with caring responsibilities are not left out. As you know, we agreed with the other governments of the United Kingdom to have a common set of arrangements between the 23rd and the 27th of December to enable 3 households to join together to form a single Christmas bubble. Now here in Wales, that Christmas bubble can be joined by a single person, a single parent, or somebody with caring responsibilities to make sure that they are not left alone for that 5-day period. This virus and this pandemic continues to be full of unpleasant surprises. It thrives on our normal human behaviour and all those places and opportunities where we come together. We've worked together throughout the pandemic here in Wales to make a real difference to the course of the virus and ultimately to save people's lives. I'm asking for your help to do that again in the days and weeks ahead. It is only by acting together that we can keep Wales safe. Diolch yn fawr iawn, wrth cwrs, I chi gyd. I'll take questions now, and as usual, all the answers will be broadcast live on our own social media channels. And first, this afternoon, over to Adrian Masters at ITV Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. I wonder if I could pick you up on the financial package that you've mentioned, and you mentioned that the calculator will be available from next week, and that what Business Wales calls a triage service will begin for businesses. But the applications don't open until the 11th of January now. Last week and earlier this week, you made clear that it was intended that that money would be available by Christmas for businesses. So has there been a mistake, and will you rectify it?
No, there's no mistake, Adrian. It's important, as I said in my statement, to recognise that there are two parts to the package that we are providing. The £180 million specifically for tourism and hospitality industries will require businesses to provide evidence and to provide information to allow payments to be made, and that's what the triage checker will provide. The remainder of the money is being delivered through local authorities using rateable values and the same system that we have used twice already during the pandemic. And our local authority colleagues are working hard to make sure that those payments, that part of the help, will be available before Christmas.
Thank you. And could I ask you about foreign travel? The current restrictions, I understand, will remain in place until January, and that means essential travel only, i.e. no holidays, no flights for holidays. Can you confirm that that's the case? And can you explain it? And could you also explain why you're not looking at the test and release scheme that has been introduced in England?
So this is quite complicated, so I'm going to just make sure that I get it completely right for people. The regulations in Wales will prevent people leaving Wales to go to high incidence areas, tier 3 and level 3 areas in Scotland or England, or from coming into Wales from those high incidence areas. The regulations will not prevent people leaving Wales to go to lower tiers in England or Scotland, although the advice of the Welsh Government is clear that people shouldn't travel unless they have a very good reason for doing so. Because people are able to travel into, let us say, tier 2 areas in England, they will be able to go to airports in England that are open because the English government has resumed international travel. So people in Wales will be able to travel if they take that route. Our advice to them is not to do it, because you put yourself and you put others at risk. What has not changed, however, is the regime in Wales for when you return. When you return from international travel, you will still be subject to a 14-day quarantine period. And that is to make sure that people returning from elsewhere in the world don't bring the virus back to Wales and cause a difficulty for others. And we definitely saw that at the very start of the pandemic. You remember that the earliest cases we saw were largely people who'd been on holiday during the February half-term to other parts of Europe where the virus was already in circulation, and they returned to Wales and they were already infected. So the part of the travel restrictions that has not changed is the quarantine on return. We advise people, strongly advise people in Wales to avoid travel other than where it is necessary.
So technically they could go to Gatwick, say, which is, you say, is in tier 2, but you would advise against it.
It will not be illegal for people in Wales to do that, but the strong advice is that going on holiday is not a good reason for leaving Wales during a pandemic with all the additional risks that will cause. Thank you, Adrian. Over to James Williams of BBC Wales.
Diolch yn fawr, Prif Weinidog. Can I get these answers in Welsh and English, please? Can I start with the vaccine? Can you just give us an outline of your thinking on how far down the priority list we need to go before you start loosening, before it has an impact on the level of restrictions? Is it your thinking that if the vulnerable and the elderly are vaccinated, but there's still high prevalence amongst younger people, that we all go back to normal? Can you just sort of outline your thinking on this?
Thanks, James. Look, it's important to explain to people that we will still need to take a precautionary approach until we have sufficient number of people vaccinated to be sure that the risks that are posed to our health service and to people falling ill with the vaccine has been effectively suppressed. And that is not going to happen quickly. Even with the vaccines that are coming our way fastest, you have to have 2 doses of them 3 weeks apart. They're not effective until after the 2nd dose. So even those people who will be vaccinated in Wales in December will not see the benefit of that vaccine until into the new year. It'll then, James, I think, be a combination of 2 or 3 different factors. How quickly the supply of vaccine comes into the United Kingdom, how quickly the other vaccines that are in the pipeline obtain approval from the regulator, and then how quickly we are able to deliver it on the ground. And we will need to be able to come down those tiers of vulnerability before we see a difference, the vaccine making a difference in our daily lives. But that at least is a path of progress. That at least is a path where things are moving towards getting better. And we will, as ever, be guided by the advice of our Chief Medical Officer and other advisors as to the point at which things are safe enough for us to be able to lift restrictions, get back to something more approaching what was previously normality. So mae'n dibynnu ar nifer o bethau, mae'n dibynnu ar faint o'r brechiad sydd ar gael I ni yma yn y Deyrnas Unedig ac yng Nghymru. Mae'n dibynnu ar posibiliadau newydd sy'n dod trwy'r system, a mae'n dibynnu ar y cyflymder gyda ni'n gallu defnyddio I roi y brechiad mas i'r bobl. Fel arfer, yma yn y Llywodraeth yng Nghymru, byddwn ni'n fynd I dibynnu ar y Cyngor, y Prif Swyddog Megyddol a pobl eraill sy'n cynghori ni am pryd yn y proses na, byddwn ni'n cyrraedd at y pwynt ble ni'n gallu llacio cyfyngiadau achos mae'r brechiad nawr yn digon yna I le I warchod ni I gyd oddi wrth y coronavirus.
Thank you. And your Health Minister didn't have the figures to hand this morning on Radio Wales, but do you know how many of the around 84,000 cases in Wales can be tracked back to emanating from pubs and restaurants and hospitality venues? And can you just give us an indication of where you need to be over the next fortnight when you review the new restrictions for you to change the rules around pubs and restaurants and for the booze ban to be reversed? You know, where do you need to be, do you think?
I don't have the first set of figures, but on the second point, we would need to see figures coming down across Wales. We need to see a sustained fall in those numbers, so we will be clear that the trajectory is heading down as well, and we would need to see Wales, in terms of the number of people falling ill with coronavirus, coming more into line with the levels that are used to determine level 2 and tier 2 in England and in Scotland. Because if that were to be the case, then the flow of people into our hospital system and the pressures that are currently being created there would be being mitigated. But those are the sorts of things that we would need to see before we would be in a position to do anything to lessen the restrictions that we have to have in place in Wales in order to bring the virus under control, to see the number of people who are dying from it decline, and to allow our health service the room it needs to deal not just with coronavirus, but with all the other things that we rely on it to respond to in our lives. So mae'n just yn dibynnu ar y ffigyrau. Os mae nifer o bobl sy'n dioddau o coronavirus yn Cymru yn dod lawr, os mae hwnna'n digwydd mewn ffordd canoladwy, byddwn ni'n gallu weld hwnna'n digwydd nid jyst am un diwrnod, ond ni'n gallu weld y patrymau sy'n mynd at y dyfodol. A bydd rhaid I ni weld y ffigyrau yma yng Nghymru dod fwy yn ei le, ble mae'r tier 2 a lefel 2 yn yr Alban ac yn Lloegr, y ffigyrau mae nhw'n dangos I bod yn y lefel na. Achos yn y lefel na, ni'n gallu fod yn digon hyderus. Bydd y nifer o bobl sy'n marw oherwydd coronavirus yn mynd lawr. ac y pwysau ar y gwasanaethau iechyd yma yn Cymru yn codi, ac allwn ni fod yn hyderus bydd y gwasanaethau iechyd yn gallu ymdopi nid just gyda coronavirus, ond gyda popeth arall ni'n edrych at y gwasanaethau iechyd i roi i ni gyd. James, thank you very much. Over to Will Hayward at Wales Online.
Thank you, First Minister. There's been widespread criticism on the new rules for hospitality, but given the number of hospital admissions we're seeing and the fact it will take a week for us to see the impact of the new measures, is there a risk that the Welsh Government will actually have to bring in more restrictions at its review on December the 17th, rather than relax the ones in place? And if you do have to bring in more restrictions, what would be the next things to close?
Well, when I stood here a week ago, I was reporting to people the way in which we had more people in hospital than ever before because of coronavirus. And a week later, the only thing that has happened to those numbers is they've gone up relentlessly every day. So while I was sure last week that we had made the right decision in principle, I am even more certain today that had we not taken those actions, if we were not introducing the extra restrictions, controversial as they have been in some places, the impact on lives and on our health service in Wales would have been beyond what we would have been able to bear. Now, I hope and remain, the advice that we have remains that provided we do these things now, on the 17th of December, we will not need to introduce further measures. But as I said in my opening remarks, difficult as these decisions are, the Welsh Government will do the right thing, not the thing that is easy. And if we were to be faced with a need to do more in the future, then that is what we would do. We're not expecting or anticipating that that will be the case on the 17th of December.
Thank you. I also want to ask you about the support for businesses. Is there enough money for every business in Wales who is eligible to access the funds, or will it be on a first-come, first-served basis? And can you just say specifically, when will this be available for people to apply, and what is the deadline for application? And if I could also ask the current R rate for Wales, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. So the money is not on a first-come, first-serve basis. The sums have been drawn together on the basis that we can provide for all 8,000 hospitality businesses in Wales and all 2,000 businesses in the supply chain from the £180 million that we have set aside for that strand in the £340 million package. So the other part of the package, the £160 million, people are already working to get those payments out to people this side of Christmas. We are expecting next week that Business Wales will have up on its website all the information that other businesses will need to make their application, and we're expecting those applications to open early in January. I don't have in my head how long the application window will be open, but I'm sure that will be available to people next week. On the R number, then, as ever, there are a variety of calculations of it. The one that we published in our TAC yesterday, the TAC report yesterday, which is the sort of consensus statement, is that it's 1.1, but there are some estimates who put it as high as 1.4. Well, thank you very much. Over to Mike Hughes at Global.
Diolch yn fawr, Prif Weinidog. Can I ask you, are you concerned about the public's reaction to the vaccine? What do you think it's going to take to win over those people that are sceptical about its effectiveness and what's contained in it? And are you prepared to take the vaccine yourself in public to win people over?
Well, I think you have to divide the public into a number of different groups. There are sadly some people who we will never convince and who've become captured by those sort of conspiracy theorists of the far right, and I don't think it's possible to persuade that small group of people. What we have to concentrate on are those people in the middle who will want to be sure that the vaccine is safe, who will want to be sure that the vaccine is effective. And there I think we have everything that we need in terms of the evidence from the regulator, from the manufacturer, And we will be working with the UK government on a common advertising campaign and information giving campaign to be able to offer those people who are not against vaccination per se, but just need to make sure in their own minds that they've got the information they need to come forward for this vaccine. We'll be working with other nations in the United Kingdom to make sure that that is available to them. I'm not expecting myself to be in an early priority group for the vaccine, but I can absolutely assure you that as soon as the vaccine becomes available to my part of the population, I will be there making sure that I get the benefit of it.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure you're acutely aware now of the frustration among businesses in the hospitality sector, given that heaven and earth appears to have been moved to allow the 5 days relaxed restrictions over Christmas, but there's still no yet clear commitment to lifting the alcohol ban on the 17th of December. Are you able to give a clear indication that, you know, there is a likelihood that that ban will be lifted? And are you concerned about the impact this is having on you personally, and that you might be slightly concerned that you might not be able to show your face in a pub again?
I've got no anxieties of that sort. Mike, I take the decisions that I do because I know that they are the right decisions and that they will save lives here in Wales. And even when the decisions are difficult, so long as I can look at myself in the mirror and know that I am doing what I believe with all the evidence that we draw on and the advice that we get, that I am doing and this government is doing the right thing, that is what has to matter to me, and not whether it is in a temporary way unpopular or that other people might take a different view. I'm keen to answer your question. Nobody should have an expectation that by the 17th of December all these rules are likely to be lifted. In my answer to James Williams's question, I made it clear what we would need to see by the 17th of December to make any change. The numbers of people that we see suffering from coronavirus are going up every day. We will have to see that go into reverse. Not only would the numbers have to start coming down, we would have to be confident that they are coming down in a reliable way and that the trajectory continues to be down. And we'd have to be confident that the actions we are taking are sufficient to safeguard our health service from the sort of pressures that I reported yesterday when ambulances simply weren't able to get to people who needed their help in a timely way because of the weight of coronavirus in the system. So the 17th of December is a review day. It's one of those regular review days that we commit to throughout the coronavirus period. Nobody should read a sort of easy lesson off it, that somehow on the 17th of December these restrictions are bound to be lifted. Thanks, Mike. Drosodd i Adam Hale at PA.
And Prif Weinidog, the summary of advice that you've used to justify the restrictions for hospitality, while referring to other associations between hospitality infections and super spreader events, don't appear to explicitly back up the specifics of the measures that you've introduced. Do you accept that to an extent that these latest rules represent a hit in hope of having the expectation of rather hit in hope than in expectation of the desired effect of lowering the R rate?
No, I think that is absolutely not the case at all. If you read the TAC report and if you read the SAGE advice of the earlier in November, they are clear that Tier 3 and Level 3 restrictions in Scotland have been effective in turning back the virus. Level 2 restrictions, not effective. Level 3 restrictions are effective. What was missing from our repertoire of restrictions to put us in line with Tier 2 or Tier 3 or Level 3 restrictions elsewhere? The fact that we had the most generous set of rules in relation to hospitality. That's why we have plugged the gap. That's why it is not hit and hope at all. It is drawing directly on experience elsewhere, the advice from the most senior scientists that we have, our own Chief Medical Officer, all of whom say this is the right thing to do. That is why we are doing it.
Thank you. And what is to stop currently people from areas of Wales with high levels of coronavirus piling into English towns and cities for a drink with a substantial meal, of course, where pubs and bars remain open? Are you just relying on them doing the right thing at the moment? If you are, why couldn't that confidence in people be used to keep pubs here open to be used responsibly?
Well, the law would not require people in Wales not to travel to a level 2 or tier 2 area outside Wales. The advice of the Welsh Government, the clear and ambiguous advice to people, is not to do it. Because to do it is to add to the risks that we are already facing, and those risks are already driving coronavirus rates rapidly upwards in Wales. So please don't do it. It is not good for you. It is not good for anybody you know. It is not good for the rest of the population of Wales. And I think there is a very big difference myself between the idea of people getting in their cars, travelling long distances to do that, when you, rather than simply being able to take advantage of hospitality open on your doorstep. So that's the position. Legally, it's not preventable, but in every other way, it's not to be advised. Diolch, Adam. Over to Rupert Evelyn, ITV.
Thank you, First Minister. I join you from a Indian restaurant, contemporary Indian restaurant here in Swansea, where the owner told me this morning just what a financial impact your policies are having on his business. He wanted to know, and quite specifically, why it was that his business here has had no COVID cases connected to it whatsoever. He understands that your policies are about protecting people from ultimately from dying, but wanted to know why you are killing his business and so many others.
Well, I'm afraid he's simply asking the wrong question. And it's a question I've faced many times during the whole of this pandemic. Why are you doing this to my particular bit of the world? Why can't this happen? Why can't that open? And the answer is because collectively and cumulatively, all those individual examples add up to the position that we see in Wales today. The rates of infection in Swansea went up to 357 per 100,000 in the population overnight. The positivity rate in Swansea rose as well to 22.3%. The risks of coronavirus in Swansea are absolutely real, and they are more real in the BAME community than almost any other part of our society. And while there may be individual examples where people can say we haven't had a problem here, collectively, the people of Swansea face a coronavirus crisis. That is why we are having to act in the way we are, but that is why we have mobilised the £340 million worth of help, which I hope will, while not compensating, I know, for everything that is lost when a business cannot operate, will allow that business to survive through the coming weeks so that it's there to resume trading and to resume being a successful business once coronavirus conditions allow.
Thank you for answering that. And my second question, in a sense, repeats, I know what you've already been asked, but listening to your language around what may or may not happen on the 17th of December when you have your sort of 3-weekly review, everything you are saying points towards easing of restrictions being unlikely and strengthening of restrictions being more likely. Are there any scenarios, as you stand there now, where you think actually this particular sector might see some easing of restrictions come the middle or later this month?
Well, what we will do is we will review the situation as it appears here in Wales as we come up to the 17th of December. Coronavirus has caught us by surprise in many ways It got worse much faster than we had expected. I don't want to preempt it. I want to be guided by the advice, the science and the evidence at the time. What I don't want, though, is for people to imagine that there is somehow an easy way in which things are likely to get better quickly and allow us to lift restrictions in Wales. If the conditions allowed it to happen, that is what we would do. But we'll have to wait until we're closer to the 17th, see the evidence then. But the bar is not a low one. It has to be that the figures that I am looking at and reported to you in relation to Swansea, that the day-on-day rise that we have seen for nearly 2 weeks now is reversed, and reversed in a sustainable, reliable way. Thank you, Rupert. Over to Harry Evans of the Daily Post.
Prif Weinidog, have you worked up any forecasts for the economic impact the new rules on hospitality will have in terms of businesses and jobs being lost?
Yes, of course, we have those. I think there will be next week a publication by our technical advisory group, which draws together a whole range of those economic indicators. We had to have preliminary, at least, ideas of that in order to put together the package of help that we have announced this week, because behind those headlines lie the sort of figures that we've had to work through in order to know how much help would be needed.
Diolch. And how certain are you that the science you've relied on to make this decision proves that hospitality is causing the spread of the virus?
Well, I'm as confident as I can be, because the advice we get is not just from one source. It's from all the different sources that we rely on. So it is the same advice that we get from the Scientific Advisory Committee for Emergencies, which is a UK body, which advises us and the UK government. It's the same advice from our own technical advisory group, so those are the scientists that we rely on here in Wales. It's the same advice from our Chief Medical Officer. It's the same advice from our Chief Scientific Officer. Every source of advice that we have directly available to us is telling us the same thing, that we have to act in the way we have in relation to hospitality. When people get together, the virus spreads. Hospitality is designed to bring people together. That's why we go there, is to socialise and to be with other human beings. Very sadly and very cruelly, this virus hits us in the places where we are at our most human. And it's because of that, and because the advice is not just from one strand or one source, but from them all, that we've come to the decisions that we have. Harry, diolch yn fawr. Over to Rob Taylor at Wrexham.com.
Good afternoon. Is it possible to get the latest on the outbreak at the hospital in Wrexham? And given the slowness of all staff testing during the first outbreak, how confident are you that the vaccine rollout to staff and patients who are eligible can be carried out swiftly? Okay,
thanks, Rob. Well, I came with the figures on Wrexham this morning. So overnight, there are a small number of patients and staff that have been newly tested as positive. They're in single figures in both cases. 4 wards are currently closed at the Myla as a result of the outbreak. And measures are being taken, as you know, across the hospital to reduce staff and patient movement, to step up staff testing, and to make sure that the most stringent infection prevention and control measures are in place. In relation to the vaccine, it's a sensible question, because the Pfizer vaccine in particular does pose some challenges in its distribution and its delivery. It has, as you know, got to be stored at below 70 degrees centigrade. It can only be taken from the store for a fixed number of hours. The regulator set a minimum batch level and said that you couldn't break up a batch of the vaccine below that level. So safety and effectiveness of the vaccine does have to be very carefully thought through. But here in Wales, we had a big exercise in the NHS only a week or so ago to test all of those things. We're as confident as we can be that when the vaccine arrives and we start vaccinating on Tuesday, that we will be able to deliver it to those frontline staff and those most vulnerable people who we want to get to first.
Thank you. And going back to your remarks comparing Wales to a Tier 3 area in England in the hospitality sense, how does that stack up against the wording of your new travel regulations? Because those regulations refer to restricted UK areas or Tier 3 in England. If Wales itself is effectively Tier 3, doesn't that mean that the loosening of travel restrictions in and out shouldn't have happened?
The regulations will prevent people going from Wales or coming to Wales from a Tier 3 area in England or a Level 3 area in Scotland. Our legal powers are such that we can regulate what happens inside Wales. When people leave Wales, it is for the country that people are going to take the actions that are necessary to prevent infection to their population. In England, the government relies entirely on guidance. There are no regulations there, and we are therefore acting in the same way. We are providing guidance to people in Wales not to leave Wales to go to a Level 2 or Tier 2 area elsewhere, but it's guidance. Our regulations prevent people from going to or from a Tier 3 area because that's the tier that we are ourselves in Wales. Thanks, Rob, to Elgan Hearn at the Local Democracy Reporting Service.
Maybe move on.
Or maybe not. We'll go to Alan Evans at Llanelli Online. No.
First Minister.
Yes. Okay. We'll go back to Elgan.
Yes.
We'll go to you first.
Sorry about that, First Minister. Right then, I apologise for going back over old territory here, but since you've just said earlier on that effectively Wales is a Tier 3 country, okay, is it fair that part of Wales, such as Powys, where I'm in, and North Wales and other parts of Mid Wales, are being treated the same way as South East Wales, where the incidence rates of coronavirus are far higher?
Look, it's a perfectly fair question, Elgan, and I've answered it before. So in North Wales, as you mentioned, 3 of the 6 local authority areas in North Wales have worsened the position again today. Apologies, that's amongst 25-year-olds. 5 of the 6 local authorities in North Wales, the position has worsened today. The position has worsened in Powys today. The reason why we're treating Wales as a single area is to protect those places. Because if we weren't taking the same actions in those parts of Wales where for now the virus is lower than it is in the worst affected areas, all that would happen would be that those areas would catch up with everywhere else even faster. Tier 2 and Level 2 restrictions in Scotland and England were found by the SAGE research not to be effective. Why would I offer people in Powys a set of protections that I know will not protect them? It simply wouldn't be right, and it simply wouldn't make sense. And although it means that they're having to live with these restrictions a bit earlier than the numbers at the moment would suggest, it will help people in Powys not to suffer the impact of the virus that we are already seeing in other parts of Wales.
Diolch am hynny. My second question really would be, right, a lot of people living close to the border are used to shopping in England. And many people I know have looked forward to the end of the lockdown restriction in England, which will allow them to go Christmas shopping in towns such as Shrewsbury, Hereford or Oswestry. Would you be telling these people not to go Christmas shopping in these towns this year?
Well, I think all 3 places that you mentioned are in Tier 2 areas in England, so the law in Wales will not prevent people from going there. The advice of the Welsh Government is not to do it, because the further you travel and the more other people you mix with elsewhere, the greater the risk you pose. this is a year to go Christmas shopping in Wales, because that, and close to home, because in that way you can both celebrate Christmas and you can do it without posing a risk to yourself and others. Again, diolch yn fawr. And well, once again, but finally for today, to Alan Evans at Llanelli Online.
Diolch, First Minister. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride in Llanelli here.
We'll put that
First
right next
Minister,
week.
Diolch. First Minister, you've come in for criticism throughout the time you've been dealing with the pandemic. Critics, including Neil McAvoy, Neil Hamilton, Adam Price, Rena Bjorwith, say you've been making it up as you go along. You're a tin pot dictator, changing your mind like the weather, draconian, lacking logic, lacking leadership, thin on detail. The list goes on. Are your critics justified in their carping from the sidelines, or is this baseless, cheap political point scoring, scaremongering, and fuel for conspiracy theorists?
Well, Alan, some of the names that you read out are people for whom I have a lot of respect, and I'm always happy to engage in discussion and challenge and all the rest of it. There are others, and there were names on your list as well, who I think belong in a different part of the political spectrum, who are not interested in genuine dialogue, who try and convince people of things that are simply not the case. So we're a democracy. People are entitled to make whatever challenge they like to the government. My preference is always to engage with people where I think what they're trying to do is to make a genuine contribution to getting best decisions made here in Wales. And where there are people who are genuine in that dialogue, I am very keen to respond genuinely to them. Where I think there are people who are not interested in that sort of discussion, but are simply there to try to scare people or frighten them into thinking they have a government who's not on their side, then I'm afraid I won't be spending a lot of my time engaging with them.
And your critics have made some points which on the surface seem quite reasonable when identifying the positives of models of dealing with a pandemic in other parts of the world. Switzerland's policies and approach have been successful. The models based on individual responsibility, as your mantra is really, rather than prohibition and controls. How much of what is happening, working in other parts of the world, is being implemented here in Wales? What are you taking from that?
Well, I think this is a complex area. First of all, to say we are very interested in what goes on in the rest of the world, and we're very lucky with Public Health Wales. It's always been an organisation with very strong international links through some very senior staff who work there. And I know our own Chief Medical Officer, for example, has had direct discussions with South Korea and other countries which appeared to be very successful, trying to make sure we learned the lessons here. The problem is, though, Alan, that over the course of this pandemic, some countries that were thought of at some points to have had very successful replies to coronavirus have then found themselves in trouble again. So at various points, I remember early on in the pandemic being told that we should be following South Korea, that we should be following Israel. Both of those countries have significantly faced difficulties subsequently. I've been regularly told on the floor of the Senedd by some members that we should have done what Sweden did, and yet Sweden is having to take completely different measures today. And yes, the Swiss example is a very interesting one, and we should look to see what we can learn from them. But then you have to think about the very different cultures that different places have. And I am responsible for Wales. I have to respond to the way in which people in Wales go about our daily business, the extent to which people in Wales will be prepared to go along with things that people in other parts of the world go along with, drawing the lessons where we can, but never thinking that you can just simply drag and drop, pick up what somebody else has done and make it happen here in Wales. It's just, sadly, a bit more complicated and difficult than that. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you all very much indeed.